Welcome to JenTalks, and as promised, I am doing this week's talk on learning how to say no. And I suppose where I'd really like to start for people is understanding why some of us, not all of us, have great difficulty saying no to people. And it's not just about saying no. This talk's really about beautiful, healthy boundaries. So sometimes we say no when we really should say yes. Sometimes we say yes when we really should say no. So it's about also kind of understanding when we want to say yes to ourselves or maybe yes to opportunities, as well as just saying no and no to people. And also, if you're a people pleaser, you might also you mightn't even need to be asked sometimes. You might be offering your services before people even ask you for some help or ask you for a favor. So if you feel like you need to say more in your life, you feel like you're a bit of a people pleaser, like you have a disease to please, this talk is completely for you. So let's start with our relationship with the word no. Not getting into like geographical areas, but just because I am Irish and I work in the country of Ireland, most of my clients and learners and students are Irish. And one of the big things that I always try and teach people is about the difference between like mainland Europe and Ireland in their communication style. So in Ireland, we have what we call an indirect communication style. And in mainland Europe, we have what is known as a direct communication style. So what we mean by that is when we ask somebody from mainland Europe, their style of communication is completely direct. So their interpretation of time is literal. If you ask them, are they going to go to the after party, for somebody's leave and do, if they're going to go, they'll say yes. If they're not going to go, they'll say no. They don't follow it with an excuse necessarily. Where we take that in the Irish context, if you ask somebody, are they going down to the pub for the leaving party? They might give a number of responses like, sure, I might show me face, or I'll pop in for an hour, or I'll see, or we have all these sort of vague answers that could mean anything from yes to no, and mainly they actually mean no. So why is it then that Irish people in particular struggle with the word no? Well, I suppose we could take it back as far as our Gaelic language, and we root that in the words that we use. So in the Gaelic language, we tend to use the word Neil, which means not. So even the word no by itself doesn't really exist in the same context as it does in the English language. So that's how far the difficulty with no is embedded in our culture. And of course, then our own, regardless of whether you're Irish, whether you're from the UK, whether you're from Europe, whether you're from anywhere in the world, our culture determines, our behavior around people, wanting to please people or wanting to be, even if we go back to even wanting to be liked by people. And even though, we talk about indirect communication and direct communication, and we talk about the Irish language, something that's common to all human beings on this planet is your DNA and your genetic coding. So in our survival DNA, our oldest part of our DNA, we have a want to be liked, to belong to a community, to belong to a tribe. And that goes back to survival. So when we were first on this planet and we were learning to survive, we soon learned that we survived better in groups and that it was better to get on with people in your group. So in other words, if your neighbor, heard danger and they liked you, they were more likely to warn you. And if they didn't like you, they might decide to not warn you that the dinosaur was coming or the saber tiger or whatever it might have been at the time. So we kind of feel a little bit of shame about wanting to be liked by other people and, that disease to please. But you know what? It's actually coded in our DNA. So lose the shame, lose the guilt, and just understand it is a part of you. And I suppose it's about understanding that it's a part of your DNA and it's part of your coding, but it doesn't have to ruin your life. It doesn't have to be the one calling the shots. So anybody that's ever heard me talking about positive intelligence will know I talk about the saboteurs in our mind, and they're really just the voices of the ego that tries to keep us safe. And we needed that voice when we were young children. But we don't need that voice now as adults. We know ourselves what we need to do to keep safe. But the saboteurs, which are where the voices of the ego remain in our mind, and the ones that are really strong when it comes to people pleasing are the avoider and the pleaser. That's the name of the saboteur. And the lies that they tell us are things like, well, if we just keep everything for the sake of peace, and as long as nobody's fighting, well, then everybody be happy. And if I give up my peace, well, there will be peace. And as long as I run around after everybody, everybody's going to love me. And really, the pleaser is really looking to be loved, and the avoider is looking to avoid anything uncomfortable and particularly conflict. So they tend to be the two saboteurs that cause us to say yes when we really want to say no, or really struggle to say no. And they really give us difficulty when it comes to setting boundaries. Now, I don't have enough time on this quick talk. I'm trying to squeeze as much as I can into maybe 10, 12 minutes today, only because otherwise people just don't click on the video. Nobody has that much time to spare anymore. So I'm trying to squeeze as much as I can in relation to how we struggle with saying no. So the first one is that it is a part of our DNA, that we know that it's part of our coding. It's also relating to our language, it's in our culture, and it's also relating to our style of communication. We have an indirect style versus a direct style. That's more common in Europe. Going back now to the saboteurs, they're the voices that control the thoughts that we have, and they communicate with us, and we're usually not aware of them. So the first thing is to raise your awareness that there is a saboteur in your mind that sabotages your success by driving your behavior, and your behavior is people pleasing and avoiding unhappiness. If that's true for you, that this may or may not relate to you. So the first thing is recognizing that they exist, listening out for that voice, knowing that that's not actually your true self. Your true self wants you to be completely happy on this planet and doesn't feel guilty and doesn't feel selfish when they say no to other people. But we have been conditioned to put other people's happiness first because we see that in society and we see different roles and identities. Now we need to get into how do we overcome the difficulty of saying no to people or putting boundaries in place. And here's, I suppose, my favorite quote when it comes to boundaries. Healthy boundaries. So people talk about boundaries all the time, but it's really about healthy boundaries, because you can put as many boundaries up as you want, but healthy boundaries are where people come and go. Things come and go. You can say yes to some things and no to some other things. It's not just no to everything. So healthy boundaries are the distance at which you and I can respect each other at the same time. Now, another version of that, the original version, is healthy boundaries are the distance at which you and I can love each other at the same time. Sometimes the love bit doesn't resonate with people. I like the respect one, because usually what happens if you're a people pleaser, or you have the disease to please, and people ask you to do something that you don't want to do, as soon as you say yes, the respect you have for yourself goes out the window. So we want to put boundaries in place that allow us to respect ourselves as well as the other person that we're trying to help out or we're trying to do something for. So let's start with ways to say no. First of all, when we say no to somebody, we're saying yes to ourselves. So ask yourself, in your top 10 list of people in this world, where do you come on that list? Now think about that for a moment. Do you even make that list? Do you make your own list of top 10 people in this world? Well, I'm going to challenge you by saying that the only place that you should come on that list is number one. You should be first on your own top 10 of people, because you know what? If you're not number one on your list, how can you look after yourself well enough to do all these things that you feel you want to do, or you like doing, or you care, all the people you care for in the world, or all the people who rely on you, because you're not going to stay healthy and well and in shape if you don't put yourself number one on the list. Sometimes we struggle with that. Like often I do this in groups and they really struggle with being number one on the list. And I say, even if you can't do it for yourself, put yourself number one on the list for the people you love. Because when you look after yourself and you put yourself as number one on the list, you're going to be around for longer. You're going to be around in better shape for longer, and you're going to be in better form. So you're not going to be as overwhelmed and resentful as we end up being when we just run around saying yes to everybody. The second thing about saying no to people is we struggle with that word no. So often what happens is people ask us to do things, or people tell us their difficulties, and we jump in with solutions. The big tool in saying no to people is the pause button. It's a little breath of maybe 3 seconds. Just breathe, take a deep breath, and think before you speak. Now, if you're involved in any kind of mindfulness exercises or breath work, there's a link up on my channel on a very simple breathing exercises. If you're struggling with the respond tool, in other words, you react too quickly and you need to slow and respond. So the difference between react is we act without thinking, and respond is we think and then we act. So what we need to do is respond more rather than react, and we just take a pause. So in the moment that we pause, we say to the person who's asking us for our favor, you know what, I'll just have a look at my diary and I'll get back to you. So whether it's, something, a professional favor or a personal favor, you can say, let me have a think about it. Can I get back to you? And that allows you the moment of 24 hours to have a think about whether this is something you actually want to do or not. And if you think about it, it's kind of like when we were children and we used to say to people, we'd ask our parents, could we go to the youth club or the disco? And they'd say, we'll see. And we know we'll see meant no, but they just couldn't really, it was very unlikely that people would come back, your parents would come back and say yes. It tended to mean no. So as adults, we know that when somebody kind of says to you, oh, let me get back to you, you're 50% there towards a no. So when you go back to them the next day and you follow up with a text or a phone call, you say to them, listen, I'd really love to do that for you, but my diary's chock-a-block, or I'm busy that day, or I can't do that, or I'm sorry, not on this occasion, or whatever it might be. But you go back with your no, and it lands much easier for the person because they're already expecting a no. So instead of it being a straight out no, just let me get back to you. That's a really powerful one. Second one is, I often say this, I'd say this to my children, even though they're adults now, I would say, it's not a no, it's a not now. And that's often the case. It just isn't possible for me to go out with you this weekend, but I can go out the following weekend. Or it isn't possible for me to give you a lift today, but I'll give you a lift tomorrow. And that's often the case. I don't say that because I feel I should. It's because genuinely, that's the truth. It just isn't possible for me today. And then the other way of, I suppose, letting people, building your boundaries, building healthier boundaries is understanding for every moment that you give away to somebody free of charge. So think of it like this. You have 2 tanks on your back. One is time and one is energy. And we give them away freely, and yet they are the most valuable commodities in the world. So when you start to value your own time and your own energy, you get a little bit more selective about who you give it out to. Because realistically, the people who you care about the most, your top 5 people or your top 3 people in the world, they are the people, and yourself, of course, you're number 1 on that list. They are the people who deserve that time and energy the most. And when you give it away freely to people you don't even have a lot of regard for or respect for or love for, because we do that, don't we, as people pleasers, we leave nothing in the tank for them and for ourselves. So think about that when you're when you're offering your services away. Oh, I'll do that for you, no problem. I'll collect your kids from school, or whatever it might be. Or you're saying yes to things that you're being asked to do, you don't want to do. The time and energy tanks are going down. Mop them up. I mean, time, we get new 24 hours every single day, and energy, of course, we have to top up ourselves, whether we do it through rest or we do it through joy or meditation or whatever activities we do to top up our energy. But then we give it away so freely. So have a think about that. Think of your time and energy as commodities. Now, guys, I'm coming up to 15 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up this call. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to follow this talk up next week with a lovely little exercise called the rocket ship that will help you to identify who are the people that you shouldn't be spending your time and energy on, and prioritizing you as a person as well as your loved ones on this planet. I hope you enjoyed today's talk. If you did, comment, share it, and make sure if you know any people pleasers in this world that need to hear this talk, that you send this talk their way. It's all over my social media platforms, and of course it'll be permanently up on my YouTube channel as well. So have a fabulous weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week for part 2 of JenTalks, setting beautiful boundaries and learning how to say no without guilt. Thank you.